Nancy, and I am your MC host of the fair here today, and I'd like to tell you about our featured guest, Nellie Gail Moulton. Most people live in Orange County are surprised to learn that Nellie Gail was a real person. They think the name of the equestrian community in Laguna Hills, called Nellie Gail Ranch, is fictional. But no, there really was a Nellie Gail. Besides being the wife of a cattle baron, Louis Moulton, and mother to their two daughters, Nellie Gail Moulton was both an artist and a founding member of the Laguna Beach School of Art and Design. Her interest and influence extended to other areas as well, such as being a major contributor to the development of Laguna Beach's Moulton Theater. The 250 acres of ranch land she left to Chapman University was sold for more than $18 million and developed into the Nellie Gail Ranch. Chapman's Moulton Hall is named after the university's benefactor. The Moultons' ranch home once stood where the Oak Brook Village Shopping Center in Laguna Hills is now located. The final sale of Moulton Ranch land to the Mission Viejo Company took place in 1976. Today, the cities of Aliso Viejo, Laguna Hills, Laguna Niguel, and Laguna Woods, as well as Aliso and Wood Canyons Region Park, occupy land that once was the part of the Moulton Ranch. Although records indicate that Nellie Gail Moulton passed away in Laguna Hills on August 23, 1972, at a young age of 93, I am happy to say that today we will be honored with her presence. So please welcome, with the assistance of Heritage Hill Historical Park docket, Mary Lee Lindquist, wife, mother, educator, artist, philanthropist, and Orange County pioneer, Nellie Gail Moulton.
Thank you so much to the city of Aliso Viejo for inviting me here today to share with you some of my recollections of my life here on the Moulton Ranch. I decided to wear clothing similar to what I wore when I first arrived at the El Toro train depot in 1903 at the age of 24. Obviously, I am much older now, but I still vividly recall my first impression as I got off the train and looked around at the dry, parched hillsides. I thought, you couldn't even give me this place. It's too hot, dusty, and dry. However, I soon came to love this place after I met and fell in love with Mr. Louis Moulton, my husband, and I came to love the land and the people of El Toro. I'd like to start today with telling you a little bit about my life prior to meeting Mr. Moulton. I was born Nellie Maud Gail on December 8th, 1878 in Irving, Kansas. My father, John Lockwood Gail, was born in Illinois, and at the age of 17, he was a private in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. My mother, Prudence Delia Stoneman, was from Ohio. I have two sisters. My elder sister, Alta, is 4 years my senior, and my younger sister, Carrie, is 10 years my junior. Our baby brother died in infancy. When I was very young, the family moved to Nebraska, and I went to school in Omaha and Lincoln. Now, my father moved quite a bit while I was growing up because he was a merchant. And wherever we lived, though, he was in the business of running a store. I remember those days so fondly. But unfortunately, my sister, Alta, she contracted tuberculosis as a young married woman, and she moved to California. And then, when I was 15, our mother died at the age of 40. So I went to live with my sister Alta and her husband in Glendora, California. And I attended my last 2 years of high school at Citrus Union High School. I remember driving to and from high school with 2 other young ladies in a Surrey with the fringe on top. After I completed high school, I returned to Nebraska, where I earned my teaching credential. When I was 18 years old, my father married Minerva May Raymond. They married in Yuma, Arizona, when my father was 47 and Minnie was 27. When they were living in Nebraska, 2 of my half-brothers were born. That would be Dewey and Perry. In 1901, the whole family moved. Would you like me to use this? The whole family moved to, I guess this is a little bit better, so we'll try this. The whole family moved to Chelan, Washington, where my father had a store, and where my 3rd half-brother was born. That would be Cyril. I became a teacher first at Lake Chelan and then at Port Orchard. And finally I was a principal at Lake Washington, which later became a suburb and incorporated into the city of Seattle. Now in 1902, the family, consisting of my sister Carrie, then 14, my father, Minnie, and their 3 boys, moved to El Toro, California. He bought the El Toro Mercantile store, and because the post office was just next door, he was the postmaster as well. Now, in 1903, on a trip to visit my family, I was introduced to Mr. Lewis Moulton, a prominent rancher and friend of my father's. Now, the next time I heard about Mr. Moulton is when I received a letter from my father saying that Mr. Moulton was taking a trip to Boston and that he had asked my father's permission to call on me in Seattle on his way home. Well, that was the beginning of our friendship, and we soon fell in love. Where is it? Here. This was taken about the time of our marriage, which was 5 years after we met, in November of 1908. At the time of our marriage, I was 29 and Mr. Moulton was 54. Isn't he handsome? Now, it was often referred that Mr. Moulton was a widower, but in fact, he was divorced. But that was not discussed in polite society. But I'll tell you more about that later. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mr. Moulton's life prior to our meeting. Mr. Moulton came from a very impressive family. His father, Jotham Tilden Moulton, was a Harvard-educated lawyer and one of the first editors of the Chicago Tribune, and a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln's. Mr. Moulton often recalled his fond memories of Mr. Lincoln coming to the family home when he was just a small boy. His grandfather, Jotham Moulton, was a doctor, and he was also served in the War of 1812. And his great-grandfather, Brigadier General Jotham Moulton, fought in the Revolutionary War. They were very impressive. Now, Mr. Moulton's mother, Charlotte Harding Fenno, was born in Boston. She was a teacher, just like me. They were married in Boston, Massachusetts, when Mrs. Moulton was 25 and Mr. Moulton was 47. There was a bit of an age difference back in those days. Anyway, Mr. Moulton has one younger brother. His name is Irving Farrer Moulton, and he was born a couple of years after Mr. Moulton. 1 second, I'm going to show you a photo. I particularly like this one because it was taken in San Francisco, and the boys look so adorable with their long curls and their velvet outfits. I'm particularly fond of this photo. When Mr. Moulton was 10 years old, his parents parted, and he moved to Boston with his mother and brother to be near her family. Mr. Moulton quit school as soon as he finished grammar school, and he went to work as running errands for a storekeeper, earning $1.50 a week. Later, at the age of 15, he went to work on the old Daniel Webster farm. Now, although he came from a family of doctors and lawyers, Mr. Moulton yearned for the outdoor life. So at the age of 20, in 1874, he took a ship, a Pacific mail steamer, in fact, down to Panama, crossed the Isthmus of Panama by train, and took another steamer up to San Francisco. A couple of days later, he hopped on yet another boat down to Wilmington, and then went by stagecoach to Santa Ana, arriving on May 6, 1874. What a journey for such a young man. Now, with letters of introduction, he was hired by Mr. James Irvine to work on the ranch for $35 a month under the supervision of Mr. Charles E. French. Now, this is on Rancho San Joaquin, which later became known as the Irvine Ranch. Well, Mr. Moulton stayed exactly 3 months, and then he went out into business with Mr. French, herding sheep. The business was very successful, and after 1 year, Mr. Moulton bought out Mr. French's interest in the sheep ranch and started running the sheep himself. He would lease land all the way from Oceanside to Long Beach, and he would carry with him a 7-piece house. Well, he changed his career a bit in 1880 when he went up to San Francisco to open a wholesale slaughterhouse. However, the business did not prove to be very successful, so after a year he returned to El Toro, where he bought another band of sheep from Mr. Jonathan E. Bacon and leased some land for grazing. Now, in 1884, at the age of 30, Mr. Moulton turned his eyes to the Moulton Ranch area, which then was called Rancho Niguel. It had originally been a grant made to Don Juan Avila in 1842. At that time, Don Juan Avila would use the ranch for grazing cattle, but he lost it in the 1860s due to economic downturn. Now, by the way, Niguel was originally pronounced Newell because it was an Indian name for a Juanino Indian village that was along Aliso Creek. At any rate, the land passed through several different owners, but by 1874, Cyrus B. Rawson owned the majority of the land, and Mr. Moulton rented 17,000 acres for a sheep ranch. Now, let's return to Mr. Moulton's first marriage. All right. Mr. Moulton married Mrs. Emma P. Moore in March 1885. Mrs. Moore had previously been married to a Santa Barbara farmer by the name of O.P. Moore, and their divorce was finalized exactly 25 days prior to her marriage to Mr. Moulton. Somewhat shocking, to say the least. At any rate, Mr. Moulton, after leasing the land for 11 years from Mr. Rawson, was able to buy the property. He was able to do this not only because of his hard work, but also from a loan that he received from his uncle in Boston, which he promptly repaid. A few months later, a man by the name of Jean-Pierre Daguerre became partners with Mr. Moulton. After that point, they had increased the land holdings in 1899 so that it encompassed the area that goes from El Camino Real, which is now the I-5 freeway, all the way down to the Pacific Ocean at Monarch Bay, consisting of 21,723 acres. Imagine that. Well, the business did quite well, But unfortunately, Mr. Moulton's private life was not quite as successful. Let me share with you an article from the LA Times.
That'll get you every time. You work too much.
According to this LA Times newspaper article of July 24, 1899, after 14 years of marriage, the suit in which Louis Moulton of El Toro is suing his wife for divorce was filed in this county late Saturday evening. The first intimation Mrs. Moulton had that suit had been filed against her for divorce was upon the arrival of a deputy sheriff with a complaint and a summons. At first, she declared she would fight the case to the bitter end. But later in the day, after more mature deliberation, she was undecided as to just the course she would pursue. Now, I don't know all the details, but Mr. Moulton was granted a decree of divorce on the grounds of domestic infelicities and alleged unfaithfulness of his wife. Now you can understand why Mr. Moulton's first marriage was not discussed in polite society. Now, at the age of 45, Mr. Moulton was an attractive, wealthy, and well-liked bachelor. However, this also caused some complications. Once again, the LA Times, on October 24, 1904, under the headline, "Sensational Breach of Promise Suit," the Los Angeles Times reported Mrs. Fanny Mansfield of Los Angeles was suing Orange County's most eligible bachelor, Louis Moulton of El Toro, for $150,000. Mrs. Mansfield claims to have in her possession about 200 letters written to her by Mr. Moulton during the period of her engagement, and these are to be produced in court as documentary evidence in substantiation of her suit. Well, according to Mr. Moulton, the engagement between him and Mrs. Mansfield had been broken by mutual agreement. Well, enough about that. Let's continue with our story. During our courtship, I met many of Mr. Moulton's wide circle of friends, including Dwight and Emily Whiting, Harvey and Frances Bennett, Judge Richard Egan of San Juan Capistrano, and that great Polish Shakespearean actress, Madame Modjeska, and her husband, Count Bozenta. Oh, I was delighted to be invited to a party by Mr. Moulton, hosted by Madame Modjeska and the Count at an upstairs club in Santa Ana. I remember playing cards with Madame Modjeska and dancing with Mr. James Irvine. Oh, Mr. Moulton and I also had lunch at Madame Modjeska's beautiful home out in Santiago Canyon. And also I remember attending Madame Modjeska's final concert in Los Angeles with Mr. Moulton. Now, as I told you, Mr. Moulton and I were married in November of 2008. And for our honeymoon, we went to Honolulu. Unfortunately, I was not a very good sailor, and I was seasick a good deal of the time. Nonetheless, I have continued to have a love of travel for the rest of my life. I'll tell you more about that later. Now, first, I'd like to show you a photograph over here of our home. When we returned from our honeymoon, our new home was ready for occupancy. It sat up on a knoll about 500 yards from the main highway, and there was a clear view in all directions, including the beautiful Saddleback Mountain. Oh, it looked like a little village with our house, the dark one, next door to the white house of the De Geers, the business office in between, and surrounded by many buildings and the barn and the garages and the workshops and the cookhouses. Now, Unfortunately, the partnership between Mr. DeGeer and Mr. Moulton, which had been called the Lewis Moulton and Company Ranch, did not last much longer. Mr. DeGeer was fatally injured when his team of horses, frightened by an automobile, bolted and overturned the wagon. He left his widow, Marie Eugenie, and their daughters, Josephine and Grace and Juanita, to manage the ranch. Now, a little bit about Mr. DeGeer. He had come over on a boat the same year that Mr. Moulton had arrived in 1874 and had gone to the Rosecrans Rancho and worked for Mr. Domingo Amestoy. After working there for 8 years, he had gone to San Juan Capistrano to work with Mr. Marcus Forrester. And then, after 4 years and becoming a man of substance, he ended up back at the Rosecrans Ranch and married Marie Eugenie. They had their first son, was named Domingo, after Domingo Amestoy, their mentor. Let me show you one photograph of Mr. Moulton's trusted friend. Here we go. Now, in 1892, the family had moved down to the El Toro area. But Mrs. DeGeer, she sent the 3 girls, Juanita, Grace, and Josephine, to a convent school up in Los Angeles to avoid what she considered the negative influence of a rough country environment. Anyway, it was a very sad day for all of us when Mr. DeGeer died in 1911. But it was a joyous day the year before, on January 21st, 1910, when our first daughter, Charlotte Gail Moulton, was born at Clara Barton Hospital in Los Angeles. Mr. Moulton gave me this gold bracelet on occasion of the birth of Charlotte. I wear it every day, and I'll give it to Charlotte upon my death. There are 2 tiny little teeth indentations where she would teeth on it. You can see the bracelet in this photograph. Now, our second daughter, Louise Marie Moulton, was born on December 30th, 1914, right here on the Moulton Ranch.
Excuse me.
Now let's return to a little more about the ranch. After Mr. DeGeer died, the families decided to change from sheep herding to cattle ranching and tenant farming. And by 1915, there were 15 tenant farmers on the ranch, all practicing dry farming, raising beans and barley and hay. Now, let me digress for a moment. I would like to tell you a little bit about the girls' lives on the ranch. Of course, they were introduced to horses at a very young age. Charlotte was never a horsewoman, but she loved growing up on the ranch. She would like to ride in the buggy with Mr. Moulton, with his mare Lady, the 2 miles down to the El Toro post office. Louise, on the other hand, started riding at the age of 3. For myself, I was always fond of horses, but I would occasionally ride side saddle, but most of the time I preferred carriage riding. Now, when Louise was 5 and Charlotte was 10, Mr. Moulton bought them a beautiful sorrel pony, complete with a wicker-seated pony cart that he got from the entries at the Rose Parade in Pasadena. Oh, the girls would love to take that pony cart and drive over to Marie Eugenie's house and visit with her and the girls. Just 1 second, I'm going to get that photo. This is just too cute to miss. Anyway, Louise sometimes would like to team up Dickie, that's the name they gave their pony, with a gentle mule named Kitty, and take the pony cart ranch. She liked to ride around with her friends and family. She even taught her dogs to pull a cart and to obey her commands. Louise liked to accompany her father in the mornings to the cookhouse to have breakfast with the ranch hands. Now, at the cookhouses had their own cooks, and we bought vast amounts of food. Mr. Moulton always said, "The men do my work, and they will eat as well as I eat." Now, most of the ranch hands were either Basque or Mexican. And Mr. Moulton quickly learned the Spanish language after he moved to California. He spoke to his ranch hands in Spanish, and he told Charlotte and Louise, "If you wish to be close to the hearts of your men, speak to them in the tongues of their mothers." Now, Louise was particularly close to the ranch foreman, Cy Sansanina. Oh, Cy was a Basque sheep herder who had come to the ranch in 1903 at the age of 20 and stayed for 50 years. Imagine that. I remember one time when Cy was annoyed with Louise because she'd go into the barn and take the harnesses to make a harness for her pony. I remember the time that Cy marched her into her father's office and said, "Either she stays out of the barn or I leave." Well, Louise didn't stay out of the barn, and Cy did not leave. In fact, although he never married, his life for 50 years was an expression of devotion to Mr. Moulton and to the ranch. My memory is fading a little, so occasionally I have to refer to my notes. I was born in 1878, you know. At any rate, life on the ranch was a constant cycle of hard work. There was the sheep shearing, and sometimes we had to have men who would come down from, or come up from San Juan Capistrano, bringing their wives and their children to help with the sheep shearing. There also was the annual harvest and many cattle roundups. Now, after all the work was done, we'd have a big barbecue down on the ranch. We'd bring the food from the house, but the meat would be cooked right there. We'd always have a lamb barbecue, and sometimes there would be singing and dancing, too. Oh, the Basque people had beautiful songs, and their voices were so wonderful, they could make you cry. Now, as for me, my life on the ranch was not quite as difficult as it was for the men. I had the usual mother's chores. I had help for the girls in the main house, and also there were housekeepers who stayed with us for many years. I would sometimes take them on our outings down to our home out on at Laguna Beach. I also would sometimes take art lessons with that wonderful artist and teacher, Anna Hills. The girls would play on the beach, and it would be all very relaxing and very most of the time. Now, I forgot to mention one more thing that Mr. Moulton did, and that was that he owned the warehouses down by the railroad tracks. And all the farmers in the local area would bring their beans and their barley down to the warehouse to be cleaned and stored and then later sold. And he also had the cattle pens down there by the railroad tracks, and we would run the steers right from the ranch house down El Toro Road right to the pens. It was pretty exciting, actually. At any rate, going back to our life, there was also fun times. For entertainment, we would have the radio at home, picture shows in Santa Ana, and an occasional party in the area. The circus was a big deal for the girls, and Mr. Moulton would take them every year to see all of the circus acts. And of course, when they got home, Louise and Charlotte would try to do the circus acts with their own animals. There was was also the annual harvest dance that Mr. Moulton would host, and that was usually done at the El Toro Community Center. Oh, it was lots of fun. There were square dances and waltzes and polkas. Sometimes we had some smaller dances at the barn. And after a particularly bad fire, Mr. Moulton started hosting an annual dance for the firefighters for helping them save the ranch. Now, for the holidays, Mr. Moulton always wanted to be right here on the ranch. So we would always celebrate Christmas here. My father, his wife Minnie, and their 4 sons would come down from Sawtell, which is where he had his store at that time. Oh, by the way, my 4th half-brother, Raymond, was born 10 months after Charlotte. At any rate, also my sister Carrie and her husband Fred Drews and their 3 children, Rudolph, Prudence, and William, would also celebrate the holidays with us. Mr. Drews rented a 1,000-acre farm right on the ranch. And Louise was very, very fond of her cousin Rudolph. But tragically, he was killed in a hunting accident when he was a senior in high school. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my daughter's education. I told you that I was a teacher, although I never taught once I came to El Toro and married Mr. Moulton. Instead of sending Charlotte to the new 2-room schoolhouse in El Toro, I sent her to school in Santa Ana. She started in, let's see, she was 6 years old, so that would have been 1960, and she went into 2nd grade. And she stayed with friends of the family in Santa Ana. Unfortunately, her education was interrupted when the Spanish flu struck the area in 1918. Oh, everyone was sick on the ranch except for Mr. Moulton. I was quite ill, and we even had to have a trained nurse on the ranch. Both of the girls had the flu, and then later Charlotte contracted tuberculosis. Sadly, Domingo de Guerre, a bachelor, died of pneumonia 1 year later at the age of 32, leaving his mother and his sisters to run their portion of the ranch. While the girls were convalescing from the flu, we had a governess, Miss Maybelle Austin, who also taught them their lessons. Now, by 1922, Charlotte was feeling well enough and was quite husky, so she entered high school at the new Tustin Unified High School in 1922 at the age of 12. The students came from Laguna Beach, El Toro, Trabuco Canyon, and Tustin, and the entire student body was almost 200. Now, Louise, she started grammar school in the 4th grade at the new El Toro Grammar School. Always the horsewoman, Louise would either ride her pony to school, or she'd go in her cart with the pony and the mule, or sometimes standing on 2 ponies all the way down El Toro Road. You know, I think she paid more attention as to how she was going to get to school than to her lessons. But she did graduate, and she also attended Tustin Union High School. Both of the girls attended Pomona College. Charlotte entered at the age of 16 and graduated in 1930. She also attended the University of Southern California. Louise graduated in 1936, and she attended the Davis School of Agriculture, specializing in animal husbandry. 2 years after graduating from college, Charlotte married Mr. Emmett Mathis, and she had 3 children: Louis Moulton Mathis, Jane Carolyn Mathis, and, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the name. Wait. Glenn, oh, thank you. As I told you, I'm getting older. Glenn Emmett Mathis. I can't believe this. At any rate, Louise was married 3 times. She never had any children, but her last husband, Ivor Hansen, he was a rancher and also the first president of the Moulton-Niguel Water District. Now, Other than my family and my ranch, I have two passions in life: painting and travel. I started painting at a very young age, and I love to paint outside in plein air. I would love to explore all this nature on the ranch and down at Laguna Beach, and I would also always sketch places on the ranch. Oh, I did bring one painting here today to show you. It's one I did in 1908, and I gave it to our friends Francis and Harvey Bennett as a wedding gift. It's a pastoral scene of the Moulton Ranch. Now, I was fortunate to be able to take lessons from Laguna Beach artists Anna Hills, Edgar Payne, Frank Kuprian, and I also took a number of trips up into the high Sierras to study with that wonderful landscape artist, William Went. I was very fortunate to be able to exhibit some of my pieces at the Laguna Beach Festival of Arts, the Laguna Beach Art Gallery, and the Laguna Beach Art Association. And actually in 1948, I was the president of the Laguna Beach Art Association. As I said, my other passion is travel, and I've traveled extensively. In 1921, yes, that was the first year, the whole family took a major trip, and this was after the girls were recovering from the flu. We went to New York, Jamaica, Cuba, and through the Panama Canal. Because the girls were still recovering from the flu, we took along their tutor, Miss Austin, who taught them their lessons. The other trips that we always made with Mr. Moulton was a motor trip up to San Francisco. We would do that every year to visit his brother Irving, who was one of the first presidents of the Bank of California. Now, speaking of automobiles, I have to get this photo because this is priceless. Mr. Moulton had a 1906 Cadillac, and we took many trips in it. Sometimes it would throw a chain and leave us stranded. Now, Mr. Moulton never bought an automobile unless he could pay for it on the spot. He liked to say with his wry sense of humor, "It is getting to the point the philosophy in this country is $1 down and the rest when convenient." Here's a photograph, I love this one, of me and the girls in front of our new 1923 Cadillac. And also it's in front of our home. Can you believe this automobile cost $4,100? Amazing. Now, Mr. Moulton was not very fond of travel, but he was very supportive of me showing the girls the world. When Charlotte was a young teenager, I took her by car to Seattle and then by boat to Alaska with a lady friend of mine and her daughter. And when both girls graduated from college, I took them on major trips. Charlotte chose to go to Guatemala and Mexico in 1930, and Louise went to the Orient in 1936. Sadly, 2 years after that trip, Mr. Moulton, after 54 years on the land and 30 years of marriage, died right here on the ranch on December 3rd, 1936. I'd like to share with you some words written by our friend Clara Mason Fox, who remembered him fondly in her book, A History of El Toro. He was unassuming, always friendly, witty, gay, unfailingly kind and generous. There are few like him. In his later years, he was unable to get about over the ranch, but he accepted his conditions with surprising cheer, always ready for a chat with anyone, telling many humorous anecdotes and assisting all who came for aid, but not letting even his left hand know about it. He never paraded his deeply religious feeling, but was an always faithful attendant and generous donor to his church. His funeral service was attended by a throng of his friends, and was an inspiration to all who heard the eulogies given by his pastor friends. Well, we also had another death 7 years prior to Mr. Moulton's passing, when Marie Eugenie Daguerre died. She left the ranch to be run by her 3 daughters, who ran it for almost 20 years until 1950, at which time the partnership was dissolved and the ranch divided. The Daguerre family was given 7,000 acres, which later became the city of Rancho Niguel. I continued to run our portion of the ranch from 1938 until 1951, at which time I decided to retire. I built a house at 3 Arch Bay and let my daughters take over the management of the ranch. Charlotte and her husband, Glenn Mathis, came down from their home in Santa Ana and moved into the main ranch house. Louise already had a home on the ranch, and she co-managed the ranch with Charlotte's husband, Glenn. With the responsibilities of the ranch and my family behind me, I set off to see the world. Between the ages of 75 and 78, I traveled to Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, Asia, and Australia. And everywhere I went, I took many photographs, which I would turn to as inspiration for my paintings. The girls continued to manage the ranch with their husbands, and over the years, it was slowly divided and sold. The first development being Leisure World in 1963. I hope to spend the remainder of my days at my home at 3 Arch Bay on the land that I have loved for so many years, surrounded by my family and friends. I'd like to thank you all for your kind attention. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about my wonderful family and the ranch. I will be down here by these displays afterwards to answer any questions, but I hope you remember at this advanced age, my memory is fading. Thank you.